Well, I'm getting a thumbs up. This is like a cockpit. It's all very official. Fantastic. So welcome everybody. This is our workshop number 2 in a 3-workshop series by Assisterhood. And today we've got the fabulous Matson presenting, which we're all very, very excited about. So this is a bit of a mixed event. So we've got a few people live with us today, and a few of you are dialing in online. 2020 has been a strange year, so we thought we'll try and create, well, not create, but follow suit with this format of bringing people in person, but also opening up our events to more people online, so again, connect and hang out in the format that we can so far. So just to run you through the proceedings for tonight, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Assisterhood for the newbies who are dialing in today, then talk a bit about the workshop series, then hand you over into the capable hands of Matson, and she can teach us how to speak in public. Which again, I hope that I was not really opening up for an event like this, but that's fine. Then we'll move on to some Q&A. So people who are dialing in online, please put your questions in. So there should be a section in your GoToWebinar interface where you can type in your questions, and we'll pick out the questions at the end and read them out to Kat, and then we'll wrap up. So there you go. I already ran through all of that. So what an overachiever. There you go. One thing I have not mentioned, the webinar recording will be shared with all of you after we wrap up for today, and you can revisit this further and share with your friends. I'm sure there'll be a lot of golden moments. About Assisterhood, so we are a mentorship program based in Brisbane, and the genesis of the program was really born out of the thought that you can't be what you can't see, and we are strong believers in that. So our goal here is really to build a community where every person can join and look up and connect to someone more senior than them that has already been taken on a journey professionally and personally, and they can really identify with that person. So we really want everybody to be able to think, I can be the head of account services, I can be a GM, I can be a creative director, because I can see someone ahead of me who's done the journey upwards and now is willing to give back and share their story. So if you can see them, you can be them. And the best news is that you don't have to be on the journey alone. So everyone, welcome to the recording. So our first workshop, if you have missed it, was Money 101 and Setting Yourself to Financial Freedom with Tamara. It was super insightful. So if you didn't catch it before or didn't register and get the link, please hit us up or DM us. We can share the link with you. She's given us a lot of insight into how to handle your finances, what are the good questions to think about, and when to reach out for help. I have magically found out that I've been doing everything wrong so far, so that was great. But I mean, it's better to find it out earlier rather than later. And today, only marginally excited about this one, we've got Matson presenting, and she is going to teach us how to shake off your nerves and present with confidence. So I feel like Matson doesn't actually, and I keep using her full name, she doesn't even really need an introduction, because she is a bit of a legend in Brisbane, and I feel probably in Queensland and probably maybe in Australia. So if you've ever been to a networks event, if you've been to something digital, which is a massive digital conference based in Brisbane, you would have definitely seen her wrangle the troops, handle panels masterfully, asking difficult questions, sharing her own thoughts, and really transforming the digital scene in Brisbane over the past couple of years. Let's leave it at that. But yeah, I've been to multiple events around that cat, and I was always really impressed with her presence and how she handles herself and how she handles her guests and panelists. So without further ado, Kat, please come up here and share your wisdom.
Thanks, Paulina. And I tell you what, wrong way. If you can't be what you can't see, then Paulina, you've obviously been to way too many of my events, because I kind of feel like you should be standing here doing this particular presentation. That was a class act. Well done. So yes, tonight I'm talking about how to shake off your nerves and present with confidence. And as Paulina said, it's been one of the skills that I have become known for, I guess, in Brisbane, and that was an accident. I'm sure quite a few of the people watching, you're probably in your pajamas. You're probably in your pajamas, which I'm going to get that confused or not. Yeah, you're probably in your pajamas, and I hope you have a drink in hand. But how am I speaking? Well, my first speaking career really started because I'd set up a life coaching business before life coaching was a thing. And I do literally mean that. I honestly thought I'd coined the phrase. And I'd set up a business for Life Wealth Creations. I'd set up a website, Dreamweaver. Some of you know what that is. Some of you know. Yeah. I'd set up an email list. I had subscribers before I even had a newsletter, all those kind of things. And whatever I was doing was working because I received a phone call on the landline. Hi, I'm running an event. I'm looking for a keynote speaker to talk about coaching. Of course, no problem, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until the very end of the phone call where we agreed on dates, blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, how many people? 1,500. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And what you possibly don't know, unless you have presented to a room full of 15 people, is they put the screens up behind you. Like the Hilton Ballroom, it's massive. The screens are 10 times bigger than you. And you're kind of standing there going, I'm not quite sure if I should be here. And I'm going to talk more about that whole imposter syndrome in a moment, because that's actually one of the things that get in the way of our confidence when it comes to speaking. But then the next part, I guess, of where I really built my speaking muscle was when I was moderating the networks panels. How I know Georgia, obviously Paulina saw me do that. And that came about purely and simply because I think who's been to networks? Who's been to networks? So networks events are amazing. They're for marketers. They're in non-COVID times. There are 3 to 4 people sitting on a panel, moderated. It's about it's a conversation about a particular marketing topic. And I was going along because, 1, I was learning cool stuff, but 2, networks always attracts a really cool crowd. So when I was running my business and I wanted to meet interesting people, networks was the place to go. And I was walking out to the car park one night with Jodie Parker, who's the owner of Assisterhood, who they run networks. And at that stage, she was about 8.5 months pregnant. And she just moderated that panel that night, and she said, when I go on maternity leave, we're just going to go to a single speaker kind of model. And I said, why? And she said, well, because I can't moderate. And I was like, no, you can't do that. And she said, why not? I said, because the panel is actually what makes networks so amazing, because it's the space between the panelists where you have your realization. It's not just someone standing and delivering. So she said, well, who would I get? And I said, hi. That was 8 years ago now. And I moderated those panels every month for 5 years. When I said, okay, I really have to stand down, I'm going to do something else, they replaced me with 3 people. Now, I don't say that to big note myself, but the point is, speaking is a skill. I actually wasn't born with this. I was born with the hair, but I wasn't born with the ability to speak, and I wasn't born with the ability to moderate panels. And yet, those 2 skills, my ability to articulate an argument, to take a stage and to moderate a conversation, whether it's on a stage or in a meeting, honestly, is the most valuable skill I have in my toolkit. It's what has enabled me to do everything I've done as Brisbane's Chief Digital Officer over 6 years. It's what's enabled me to jump from that role into a massive management role at City Council. It's what's enabled me to drive open innovation programs where I had 400 people in a room all working on solving problems of Brisbane, like the big wicked challenges. So if you can speak, and if you can speak with impact, the world is your oyster. So that's why I'm so passionate about this particular presentation, this topic, and that's why I'm teaching it now. I'm going to do it backwards all night. So if you're following along, if you're live tweeting, if you're doing all that kind of jazz, that's what you need to do. I notice no one's got their phones out. That's because you're all holding line. Well done. So one of the biggest inhibitors of speaking with impact is we lack structure. So far it looks like I'm just having a conversation with you, right? But there is a structure and there is a method in my madness, and you're going to actually start to see the method in the madness as I speak. It's ridiculously meta to be speaking about speaking, but that's okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is structures for impact. Just like a good communications brief, just like a good press release, just like a good marketing campaign, they need structure. In a presentation, you want to get really clear on what's your introduction, what's your middle, and what's your end. Kind of obvious, isn't it? But yet we don't think about that. When we go to speak, we often think, I just need to dump all the words that I have in my head and let people know how much I know about this particular topic. But if you structure it with an introduction, a middle, and an end, then you've got a bit more clout. Your first part, though, of your introduction is actually where you get to calm your nerves. So I want to check in. And for those at home as well, you can raise your hands even though I can't see your hands. Or maybe I can. I don't know. Maybe I can. Who finds public speaking really fun and exciting? Awesome. So for those who didn't put their hand up, who finds it absolutely nerve-wracking? Who sweats? Who loses their words? Who can't pronounce a thing? Yeah, the hand's going up in behind. Yeah. Who would prefer to gouge their eyeballs out with a teaspoon rather than publicly speak? Yeah, you're not alone. I think that's roughly about 97% of the population. So my first tip when it comes to shaking off those nerves is start with something you know. And what you know is you. You start with your name. Hi, I'm Kat. And then you start with what you do and why you do it. I'm the founder and lead facilitator for a new online program called Impactful Presenters, teaching entrepreneurs, professionals and change makers just like you how to present with impact and speak with confidence. And I've been doing that, and then I go into a story. Tonight, because it's this kind of environment, I went into my stories first. I told you about that first ever 1,500 people. It went really well, by the way. And then I went into networks. So your Earn the Right is actually a really beautiful model. Beautiful model of, this is the other thing that speaking with confidence teaches you too. You learn to live without your slides. So your Earn the Right kicks off with your name. It's then what you do and why you do it. Even if what you think you're doing is boring, there is a reason why you're doing it. Oh, here we go. So it starts with your name. Then it's what you do and why you do it. So I've established that. I talked about why I think being able to speak with confidence and present with impact is so important and why I feel I can be teaching it. But then my next part is a story to illustrate. Now, even when you are ridiculously nervous, can you remember your own name? And even when you're ridiculously nervous, can you remember where you work? Now, it takes a bit of yes. And I'm not talking at the pub when you're picking up until you're nervous just because it's a cute person that you're kind of flirting with. I just mean, if you start with the familiar, then at least you've got something that you can rest on. And then if you have a few stories that you can use to back up your reason for existing, or that demonstrates that you too are just like everyone else. Now, when I say it like that, it sounds like it's a bit of a game, but actually it's not. What you're trying to do in this introduction is actually build rapport. But build rapport in a way that you're owning your stage, you're owning your presentation, you're leading the conversation. There's a fabulous book called Brag, The Art of Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. It's by a woman called Peggy Klaus, Klaus is with a K, and she talks about how you need to have your brag book. You need to have your stories ready to rock and roll that you just pull out for any particular context. I did a very similar presentation to this one the other day, and I used totally different stories because it was just more contextually relevant, or because that's what I thought of at the time. But having those stories also boosts your confidence, because you know that Even if somebody asks you a question, even if somebody starts doubting you, even if you start doubting yourself, you can kind of go, oh, no, I've got this, or I've got something similar to this. So your own pride is your name, it's what you do and why you do it, and it's a story to illustrate. And if you start off every presentation like that, then you've got a cool, calm, and connected, I deliberately say connected start. You're with your audience. Your audience is keen to listen and they're keen to hear more. So if you do that in your introduction, then what do you do in the middle? Well, you frame your thinking. I have a tendency, just a little tendency, to have verbal diarrhea. You know, when you just keep talking because you've got all of the ideas and it's so important that I have you understand how much I know and why this is so important and why you have to do it the bottom. Anyone relate to that? Yeah. 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 So actually before I do that, those notes there are literally exactly how I present my notes for presentation. So I think of a frame when I think of framing my thinking as a post-it note. I want to be able to put a concept on a post-it note. Not words, not script, not all of the things, but a frame. And then I use that as my reminder to go, this is what you're talking about. This is where you're taking people. Now, because I think in frames, I actually now don't need frames for my stump speeches. Like this is a presentation that I know pretty well. I'm going to deliver it completely differently to how I delivered it on Monday, but the essence is all the same because I've got all my frames mentally in my head. But what people often do when they've got a lot to say is they script it. And when you script it, you're then getting really caught up on either reading it or memorising it. And when you're memorising it and you forget it, then your nerves are actually worse than they were when you started. So think of your frames. Oh. So how do you avoid your verbal diarrhea? My first tip is reduce to amplify. Identify your 3 key messages. Now I'm talking to comms professionals here, so that's not going to surprise anyone. When I talk to business owners, they say, what do you mean by 3 key messages? I've got like 10. And I go, no, you've got 3. No, you've got 3. Okay, well, I'll put it into 3 pages with a whole lot of bullet. No, you've got 3. You've got 3 key messages. Now, of course, in comms, sometimes you've actually only got 1. But from a speaking perspective, what are your 3 key messages that you want to deliver, that you want to land, that you want people to walk away with and go, okay, I've got it. They're the frames of the conversation that I've just received. And then my third piece is to begin with the end in mind. Now, this is a rule for life. This is absolutely a rule for life. But when it comes to speaking, where do you want to take your audience? Why do you want to take them there? And where are they now? And therefore, what journey are you going to need to take them on to have them take action, to have them do what it is that you want them to do? Because if you're speaking to people, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's in front of a room, whether it's in front of 1,500 people, you want them to do something as a result of speaking. If not, you're wasting everyone's time, including your own. So begin with the end in mind, and then if you've started with the end in mind, that informs what your 3 key messages are. What do you need to say? What do you need to convince? What do you need to lead people through so that they will do what you want them to do? So now I'm going to keep going. Oh my goodness gracious me, it's a mouse. I forgot to print out my slides tonight, and so I can't remember what's coming up after this. Oh yeah, that's what I thought. Interesting. Some nights I speak too much, and other nights I go, did I miss something? So that's okay. So I'm curious, when it comes to speaking, and when it comes to that, no, let me rephrase. Who's experienced that imposter syndrome? Hands go up fast. Yeah. Tell me what drives that imposter syndrome. What do you hear in your head?
Not good enough.
Not good enough? Yeah.
Everyone's so much smarter than you.
Everyone's so much smarter than me. Yeah.
You're the only one.
I'm the only one who feels like that. Yeah, yeah. Nobody else suffers with imposter syndrome. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. What if I'm wrong? I know. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? I often ask myself because I get caught up in that one too. And I'm not saving lives, so I think I could actually be wrong and it'll be okay. But the reason it's funny, I did a series of catalytic conversations last week. I just started to create small 10-minute videos. And I don't entirely know why, but I started them around imposter syndrome. And they resonated so much, I was like, oh, this is the number one thing that gets in the way of people speaking with confidence. There's all these frameworks, there's all these things that I can teach you, but until you can get over your imposter syndrome, it's all kind of moot. But here's the trick. Your imposter syndrome is not something you're ever going to get over. When I was putting together Impactful Presenters, it's a 12-month program, and I started promoting it, I sat there and went, oh, I teach people how to speak. No, what if I don't have all the information? And then I had to give myself an uppercut. It was like, for crying out loud, Kat, like people say to you, they come up at the end of presentations and say, you're fantastic, can you coach me? And I go, oh, yeah. So the trick is not to try to overcome your imposter syndrome. The trick is to actually just bypass it. Fake it till you make it, kind of, but also using the frameworks that actually put it to the side. The other thing about imposter syndrome, that's actually where I was going to go with begin with the end in mind. When you begin with the end in mind, you also step into the shoes of your audience. And so instead of it being about you, it actually becomes about them. It's actually more of a service model. So it's actually more, how do I be of service? How do I take these people on a journey? And as soon as you do that, it's actually not about whether you've got all the answers. It's how do you facilitate? How do you take them from where they are now to where they need to be or where you want them to be? So I am going to finish up early in a moment because that's just how it's rolled tonight, and that's okay. So when you're watching from home, start sending in your questions, and I'm going to come to the room for questions soon in a moment. And you're basically getting a live coaching session, which is pretty cool. But to just kind of loop all of that around, and and to loop it all around actually also explains why I said yes to the invitation. So Paulina and Lynn have both kind of joked, oh my God, and I'm like, yeah, of course I'd say yes. Because I wish I knew now, I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish I knew 10, 15, 20 years, I wish I knew then what I know now. Because what I know now is we all think we're imposters. We all are making it up as we go along. It's just the older we get and the more senior you work up the ranks, we've just got slightly more sophisticated at how we fake it. And we've got slightly more sophisticated in our language with each other around how we fake it. But seriously, I mean, I work in relatively high echelons of public service, and we're all figuring it out. I'm not going to say quite making it up as we go along. You know, we've got a sense of where we're going, but we don't know the answers. So it's not about what if I'm wrong, it's how do I get to the next step? How do I facilitate this conversation to where we need it to be? And so if I had known then what I know now, I would have got off my inferiority complex, and I would have just jumped in and done a whole lot more. I would have listened and learned little structures like this that help, and then just be really powerful, and be authentic. Because the other thing too about this is when you're actually beginning with the end in mind and you're sitting with your 3 key messages, you can then be conversational. You can then be authentic. It's not a scripted TED talk or a, you know, TED talks are great, but when I watch them, I sit there and go, but I know what you're about to say. You're going to give me the tragedy story, then you're going to give me the, you know, it's just constant. But when you're clear on why you're speaking, what your 3 key messages are, and beginning with the end in mind, then it's a conversation. It's a conversation. It's a conversation at scale. And when you can have conversations at scale, then you can drive impact at scale. And when you can drive impact at scale, then you can do anything. Quite literally, then you can do anything. That's the distinction. So that's how you stay in touch with me. Open for questions.
With no cat, thank you so much. Right, so we're going to open for questions. We do have some online questions that are coming through. So guys online, just type them through. Okay, and those in the audience, just make sure you speak very loudly so everyone online can hear as well. So, any initial questions?
Yes.
Eye contact or look at the room?
Oh, I love that question. So the question is, do you make eye contact with the audience, or do you go to the back of the room? Depends on the size. So in an audience like this size, so for those watching at home, this audience is about 15 people, so it's a very intimate audience. If I haven't made eye contact with everybody, then I'm really stuffed up tonight. Like, there is no excuse for not making eye contact with everyone. In a large room, like so my 1500 room, there's a trick. You go to the back diagonal corner, then to the next back diagonal corner, and then you come to the front, and then to the other front. So you've made a big X with lines across. You try to make eye contact, but a lot of the times in those conference environments, the lights are down, so you actually can't see it. But what you've done, they can't tell, your audience can't tell at that point that you can't see them. So by doing that, you're literally capturing everybody. And for me, I always think of it as I'm casting my net. I'm literally going, you're all mine. You're all mine. The other thing I do on that, in terms of like starting off, to get everybody's attention and to get everybody rapport with me, I'll generally ask two questions that are affirmative. Who here would like to learn more about how to speak with confidence? And who here finds it really challenging to find their words? So in an environment like that, then the both hands go up and everyone's doing this. And if everyone's doing this at the top of your presentation, then they're going to keep doing this. It's true, it's true. Unless you then really say something that is offensive or something like that. But it's how you get them agreeing with you rather than kind of sitting back another upstart, or whatever it is. So that's how you build some rapport.
Do you find pacing works, or if you're too nervous, you just stand? Like I am.
I filmed. This is unusual for me to be constrained to a spot. I will always take my whole stage. Pacing, no good. So like the being nervously pacing, it's no good because it just distracts your audience. But you can use your whole stage. So if I've got a wider room, I'll often kind of move over here and I'll talk about this, and then I'll say, so back in the past, blah, 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 and then where you want to take people into the future, so you use your whole space. Try to avoid your left turn. Don't stand behind your left turn. One, because you'll do this. You clench it, which actually adds to your nerves. When you're doing that, it's actually telling your body that you're nervous, so you'll stay nervous. Whereas if you actually expose yourself, yeah, it's freaking nerve-wracking, but you settle into it and you go, oh, it's okay, nobody's shooting me, it's fine. I'll take this camera, right? So just, you settle into it. So move, but don't pace.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that when people call me, I will walk the whole house.
Oh, really?
Yes, because I'm like, I can't stand still, I've got to walk around.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
No,
So when I present, I often pace.
My recommendation then when you're on the phone is to plant yourself and then move deliberately, and then plant yourself and then move deliberately. It's an unconscious habit that if you can coach yourself out of, yeah, move deliberately. Exactly.
Any more questions?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm so used to being moderator.
I missed the you're using, and I want to learn more about that because it's open and not very authoritative. And what kind of movement do you like?
Yeah, that's a good one. And beautifully picked up too, by the way, that you saw that. So yes, See, that's a whole 50 minutes in itself. I'm just summarising it. So yes, you absolutely use big open hand gestures, not your points. When, in fact, I'm not sure if I've done this yet, but if Paulina was to ask me a question, it'd be hand up and gestured, not a yes, you in the back. Yes. The other thing I do too is when I'm asking for more questions, I will, any more questions? And if Paulina just asked me a question, I would receive it and then turn around to my room and say, so basically I'm just continuing to bring my audience in and keep opening, never closing. Hands up are always big gestures. They're always, I guess, exaggerated to really, why am I exaggerated? They're exaggerated again because you're wanting to lead a mental state for your audience. It's not just delivering some information. You're actually I'm wanting to actually drag your eyes up, honestly, because when you're dragging your eyes up, then you're thinking creatively, you're thinking positively. If it's a conversation that's down here and it's just kind of at this kind of pace, then it's just like every other conversation that we have on a daily basis and not what's going to happen. So I'm going to keep bringing you up here so I can keep inspiring, like keep bringing you up. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that comes from neuro-linguistic programming. So one of my nothing's lucky. One of the things that I did very early in my career, probably when I was 19 or 20, was I did my practitioner certification in neuro-linguistic programming. And that's basically the study of how the words we use, both out loud as well as internally, and how that impacts how we think and how we then use our bodies and vice versa. So there's a whole lot of stuff in there around pacing and leading, about building rapport, about, I mean, it was used by some less ethical people to hypnotise and manipulate. There's some trans stuff in there as well. So, you know, you've got to get it right, yes.
Yeah, that helps with your confidence. You're making yourself bigger.
Do I think that helps me with my confidence? It's certain, I'm going to say yes, but possibly not in the way that you're thinking. Mm-hmm. So when I take a stage, I go into presentation mode. So when I'm sitting in a meeting with my peers, I will still use some of these frameworks and I'll still structure my message. I will still begin with the end in mind. I'll still identify my 3 key messages. But of course, I'm not so big. But when I take a stage, this is my stage. And so those gestures, they're actually my show gestures, if you like. So that's what turns me on. So as I walked in tonight, the girls asked, how are you? I said, I'm absolutely exhausted. But as soon as I start doing this, I'm game on and I'm here to entertain, to educate, to inform. I can't be tired anymore. So it's not the direct confidence, it's just this is how I do the cat show. The cat show. Yeah.
I wanted to take a step back here as you were going. You'll say it. What do you mean? I'm not doing a good job, I think.
Yeah, okay. So the question was, tell us about, if this is a presentation I've done a few times, tell us about new content. So this is a presentation that I've done tonight's the second time. Having said that, the chunks in it and the knowledge is very familiar to me. New content, I take the new content, I take a similar approach, begin with the end in mind, I figure out what my 3 key messages are. And often I will use a wall and map out all of my post-it notes so I can see where they fit and I can see if I've got my flow. Depending on how complex the journey is that I need to take the audience on, I might use some design thinking canvases like storytelling canvas or something like that to really step into the shoes of my audience. I will still prepare my notes in that way that you saw on the slide with a handful of slides, and I don't practice. I don't practice. The times in my life when I have practiced have been easily the worst presentations I've ever done. I'm not kidding, they are appalling, because for me, what happens when I practice is the content's not fresh anymore. So I feel like I've said it before. And so it becomes really dull and boring, and I start second guessing myself. Did I just say that? So it's just blur. For people who are really nervous, I still, by all means, practice, but don't practice your script. Practice your concepts, practice your frames, get clear on, and sometimes that's a conversation with yourself in the car. You know, it's actually less about standing and trying to deliver the presentation. It's more just thinking out loud. What is it I'm trying to say in this particular piece of information? What am I trying to move, or what am I trying to convince? And keeping it in really simple, everyday language. If you're using long sentences, then you're probably confused it. It doesn't need to be confused. But yeah, does that answer the question? Yes. Yeah, beautiful.
I think Paul had a burning question.
Yeah.
Handling conversations in boardrooms.
Yeah, that's really fun. Yeah.
So if you want to counter someone who's being quite negative, or yeah, just kind of not being very cooperative in the conversation, are there any good tools and tips that you can give us to try and reframe? So what is a good response, basically, just someone being quite abrupt in their response?
Okay. So you asked in the context of panels, but really it's about a difficult meeting, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Because I haven't, in all of my panels, and I was actually thinking that I should add up the number of hours I've done in panel moderation. But in all of the panels, I honestly can't think of any difficult panelists. You've often got very verbose panelists. You've got people who, you know, you have to kind of go, in just 1 minute, Bob, could you summarise what you want to say? But that's okay, and you start making a joke of it, so on a stage it all works. In a meeting, there's a whole lot of different techniques. I'm just trying to think, where do I start? First of all, listen to understand, and then speak to be understood. So that's one of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read that book, I can't recommend it highly enough. Like if I had a Bible, that would be it. So Covey talks about seeking to understand, then to be understood, insofar as, particularly in meetings, we often hear the abruptness, or we hear the point, or we hear the arrogance, or whatever it is, and our automatic response is to bark back, or it's to politely try to engineer it back, you know, like, and our personality styles will determine how we try to manage that. But if you listen to understand first, then you can actually facilitate that person rather than butt heads with them. So that's my first tip. Where are they coming from? Where are they coming from? Second, understand that people communicate in different ways, and people have got shit going on, you know. So abruptness isn't always a sign of an asshole or anything like that. Sometimes it is, and I'll come to that in a minute. But it's not. Sometimes it's just that they've got stuff going on. So a bit of patience and a bit of tolerance before you arc up. And again, keeping to your outcomes. What are you trying to get out of this meeting, and how can you best steer it? If it is an asshole, if it is a really challenging person, that's when you need to be the most finesse in your communication, and you're less argumentative. And it's actually the most challenging because, and I've had plenty of these experiences. You seem to get more and more of them, more senior you go in organisations. I'm just trying to figure out how to articulate this in a way that makes sense quickly. Being clear on where they're coming from, being clear on where you want to go, deciding which arguments are worth taking on and which ones aren't is really important. And a really good phrase that I have often leaned back on is only fight the battles that you have to win. Don't even take on the battles that you would like to win. Only fight the battles that you have to win. Now, for most of us these days, that's actually a significant paradigm shift because we're all used to stamping our feet and wanting to make our point, because if we haven't made our point, then we haven't been powerful or potent in the workplace. Actually, sometimes the most powerful is actually to yield and to just let something go through. So only take on the battles that you must win. And then use something and then if you still need to facilitate a conversation, use something that I call agreement. Well, I don't call, somebody else invented it. I've been using it for 25 years, called agreement frames. I understand that that's where you're coming from, Georgia, and what about if we did this? Or I appreciate that that's what you'd like to do, Bob, and I'm wondering whether we should be, so you're acknowledging what you're hearing, and instead of using the but, which is actually what you want to do, you're using an and. Now, you've got to use the and, not as if it's a but, so it's not, and Paulina, that was a really great question, and that just sounds like but. And the reason but doesn't work is because you've completely negated what was previously said. So I actually try not, because I was introduced to this concept when I was 16, you will very rarely hear me say the word but, unless I'm talking about a behind. But because as soon as you say but, you've discounted everything that was previously said. You've undermined it, you've deflected it. So yeah, my agreement frames. I understand, I agree. Even though I agree that that's a good course of action. And what about if we did this? So yeah, there's some random ones. Panel conversations, I just ripped them on stage. Just so. I need a quick answer this time because the clock's running, or whatever the case may be. All right, we've got some online questions.
Yes, we'll go online and we'll get to the floor later. MJ asked, what are some of the exercises or tips that you can share to reduce anxiety before speaking, especially when English is not your first language?
Oh, that's a big one. Kudos to you, MJ, for being willing to take the stage even when English isn't your first language and you're obviously anxious about it. My biggest one on that front is mindfulness exercises, breathing. Literally breathe, big, deep breaths. Remind yourself that you're not saving lives. You're not going to die if you say the wrong thing. No, seriously, because sometimes people say that they would actually prefer to die than to public speak. And I'm like, really? So just, put it into perspective, breathe deeply. I often imagine what the action my audience is going to take after I'm finished with them. Not giving me a round of applause, not being, not coming up to me afterwards and saying, wow, that was amazing. None of that, because my mantra in this is being of service. So I visualize, where is my audience going to go? What are they going to do as a result of hearing me speak today? And so again, when I step into that place, MJ, it's less about my nerves and more about me having a conversation. So when I've breathed, when I've visualised where I want the audience to go, and when I've stepped into that service mindset rather than into me demonstrating how fabulous I am mindset, that helps to calm the anxiety. So I hope that helps.
That's great. I often get that, even though English is my first language. Sometimes these words come into my mind, and I'm like, what's the English word?
Well, it's like, so my day job is management of economic development. And it's a relatively new role. I have to stand up and deliver committee reports, basically, in council chambers. Now, in council chambers, you have to stand behind a lectern because that's where the microphone is and it's being live streamed because that's how we do it. Also, there is nowhere else to go. Chambers, they are old-fashioned, in the round kind of setups. So I'm stuck behind a lectern. It's a very formal environment with lots of it's a very formal process. So I get nervous doing that. I've been speaking for 25 years, but I get nervous delivering a 2-minute committee report. So yeah, actually, so I just have to go, okay, just breathe, remember where you are, it's okay. I don't have to put on a show here. I think that's actually part of my life. I actually don't do big arms as much as that. I hope you're not watching.
Get an email
Yeah, I'll work for me tomorrow.
Another question from online. Tish asks, what are your time filler suggestions? She always becomes nervous about gaps in a conversation or lapse in memory. Is there an easy solution to apply to all situations?
So for me, I'm quite, as you can see, my presentation finished 20 minutes before it was meant to. So I was quite happy to just go straight into a conversation and own it, and to go to stories and whatnot. In terms of conversation fillers, I can go for general rapport building. How was your day? How was your weekend? What do you think of this project that we're working on? What are you up against at the moment? I'm a big one for deepening my understanding of where people are coming from. So I will often ask questions that will help me understand them better and help me understand the situation better. Because again, if I'm facilitating, if I'm being of service, I want to know as much as I can so I can move, so I can take people to the next step. What's the second part of that question? What are your conversation fillers and?
Conversation fillers.
Oh, and you get anxious about there being a gap in the conversation?
And a lapse in memory.
Oh, lapse in memory. Well, I've got a story for you. I did have an excuse. I was 8.5 months pregnant. This time I was 8.5 months pregnant. I wasn't Jodie. And I was delivering a presentation. And not only did I forget my next sentence, I actually lost what I was saying mid-word. I'm not kidding. And I just stood there and went, I just went, well, to the women who have kids, you know what's just happened, and to the men in the room whose wives have kids, you know what's just happened. I'm completely lost what I was saying. Can anybody tell me what I just said? Like, literally, and they all laughed when they said, you were saying this, and I went, oh, okay, cool, let's go. So I guess, I had a really legitimate excuse. But you can always just go, I just lost my words. Or, be human. We as we've said, we all suffer from imposter syndrome. We're all human. So kind of going, shit, I've got no idea what to say. I think it's just fine, however you would say that. So just be okay with not being perfect. I think is the overall response to that.
I think we do have 2 more, but I believe you have answered it, but I'll just say it so the floor knows. Sam asked, any suggestions for body language and movement on stage to help draw an audience?
Well, so there's those ones. Sometimes people don't know what to do with their hands. So I will, if I'm kind of losing my hand, well, if my hands are flailing, I'll just kind of do that for a little bit. Definitely use your room. When you're sitting, also be really mindful of your hands, and sometimes this is actually just more comfortable, right? It actually doesn't make it blocked off. So that whole body language BS is just that. And if you're in a conversation and you're trying to facilitate something, you do want to use your face and your hands and your eyes to suggest enthusiasm and movement and light. You want to be very aware of your resting frustrated face, resting bitch face, resting what the hell is that idiot saying again? Particularly now that so many of our meetings are on screens, and it's very easy to be multitasking, right? And you're listening to that idiot and you go, and they can say cat, and I go, oh yeah, interesting email. So yeah, just be very aware of what your face is telling your audience at any time, whether that's one-on-one or big group.
And the last question was from Isabel. She asked if there's any techniques to combat nerves right before you present.
Breathe. Big breath. Don't drink. unless you're confident and you're good drinker and a good speaker. Both. Seriously. I mean, those of you who have been to networks would know full well that I always do networks with a glass of champagne or red wine on the stage. And that by that stage, that was probably my second or third. But that's because I know that panel. I could drink at that stage. I actually can't drink wine anymore. It's a very sad story. Vodka's good though. Vodka's great. But yes, I don't drink because what that'll actually do is, we all know what being slightly tipsy does. And if you've already got adrenaline running through your system, then any sip of alcohol is actually going to go through your system twice as fast. And you probably haven't eaten because you've been nervous all day. So it's just, don't drink to calm your nerves. Breathe, big deep breaths. There are some people who talk about, and I think this is picking up on your observation before, about making yourself bigger and doing what's called the power pose. So I think, because I haven't done it, but it involves putting your hands on your hips and rolling shoulders back and looking up. And personally, I would feel a bit crazy doing that. Well, only because I'm already a relatively large body and large personality, so I would actually feel quite gigantic if I tried to do that. So, but take on a posture of confidence. And whether it's affirmations or whether it's just reminding yourself what you're here for. Again, it's about being clear that it's not, the audience actually doesn't care how nervous you are, how much you know, or how much you don't know. The audience cares what's in it for them. WIIFM, the radio station that we all listen to, even if we listen to podcasts. So what's in it for me? And so their only focus is, what am I going to get out of this conversation? So as soon as you can step into that service mindset, that really does help to calm down.
All right, I think that was the last of the online questions. For those of you still listening, if you have any more questions, please just keep sending them through, or we can send them to Catherine in the email afterwards. I might open up the floor again for more questions. Any more questions? How much more? Any more questions, guys?
Can you tell us more about moderating? The presentation tonight was about, yeah, and I actually think while moderating feels like, because you're sharing the same people, but it's doing a good job is actually 10 times harder.
Yeah.
So how do you treat it like a conversation, but keeping in mind where you need to see the conversation and connecting it, and because you always need to make it feel like a conversation, but clearly in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a river of a question. And yes, moderation is actually 10 times harder. It's my preferred. It's actually what I prefer. I much prefer to prepare for an hour panel than an hour keynote. So the first part in being able to do that and being able to facilitate the conversation is having done your prep. So any panel I do, I will have at least one conversation with all the panelists, ideally together, to get a sense of what they bring to the conversation. Knowing what they're bringing to the conversation, I then get really clear on where do we need to take the conversation again to deliver value to the audience. So it's not about everyone just having their opinions. It's around, well, what's this going to go? And panels often do different things. Sometimes a panel is to inform, sometimes a panel is to provoke, sometimes a panel is to educate. So you've got to be really clear on what's the purpose of your panel. I will then have a list of questions drafted, and believe it or not, for an hour, well, most panels don't go for an hour. For a 40-minute panel conversation, you only need 8 questions. That's 8. Yeah, people go, what? That's nowhere near enough. It really is. A couple of reasons. One, because by the time each of your 2 or 3 panelists have each had a couple of minutes each, the time goes really. Having those 8 questions too means that you've got a crutch to sit on. But my thing has always been to go to the audience. So I will ask my setup questions. I'll get my panelists comfortable and feeling like they're in a conversation, and then go to the audience. Now that has COVID and virtual events has kind of played havoc with that. You need to be a little bit more structured now. As in you can't just weave in the questions throughout, which is but that's where the juice is for me. That's where the juice is in a panel. How do I weave the conversation? I'm always listening. So while I'm sitting in the moderator seat, I'm always listening for the common points or for the points of diversity, and then I'll pull it out and reflect it back to one of them to speak about. I'm also always making the connections for the panelists to build on. So I will very rarely just ask a question. In fact, the opening question is probably the only time that I just ask the outright question. Most of the time I will not set them up, but I'll give them a platform that they can leap off. It's not just a, so what do you think about this? What else do I do? I'm always watching the audience to see what they're engrossed in, see what they're leaning forward for, seeing what they're leaning back for, seeing what they're tweeting, all that kind of stuff. And I think that, and this is probably where the a bit of unconscious competence comes in. I'm also always watching and feeling for each of the panelists' comfort on particular things. So I'm never going to set one of my panelists up to say something or comment on something when they're feeling uncomfortable. My job is actually to make them feel comfortable that we're having a conversation in their lounge room. Absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, I often say to my panelists as we're about to go on stage, I say, don't worry, my job is to make you look good. We're just going to have a conversation. So don't worry about the timing, don't worry about the questions. I will handle anything that's controversial from the floor. I've got you. We're just going to have some fun. And again, so, you know, I talked before about throwing your net with your audience. So I, as a moderator, I do that with my audience, but I'm also doing that with my panelists. And I'm almost protecting them from the audience, but also spotlighting them and showcasing them at the same time. Yeah. And as much as that sounds complicated, it's actually not. It's just, it's the mindset, and it's not about. I often ask myself, if I could ask all the questions of these people, what would I want to know? Like, that's it. It's a curiosity. I literally go in with a curiosity, because if I want to know it, people in the audience are going to want to know it as well. So yeah, it's actually not that hard. There is an entire section in my Impactful Presenters program on moderating, but I'm thinking about pulling it out and just running it as a masterclass or an online masterclass, because I'm so tired of watching people really do bad panels. Stop it! Stop it! There was another question about that.
Yeah, I was just asked about in a bigger room, conference room, lecture or something. What do you do when you see people comment sides or looking a bit disinterested? Like, do you do anything to kind of get them back in?
Yeah.
Or you just keep
So I get them back in. I try to get them back in. Though, of course, it's very, if you've told them to live tweet you can't then, you can't then get cranky at them for looking at their phones. If I feel like I've lost people, there's a number of different interventions I'll use. First of all, I'll go big with my arms. I'll take my voice up. I'll ask questions. Like, I'll go back to my, so who here? So who here? I will also use things like what I call a pair chair. So I literally say, just before I go on to the next topic, what I want to do is just have you quickly just recap on everything that we've just talked about. So just turn to the person next to you, if you don't already know them, make sure you introduce yourself and tell them, what's the number one takeaway from the last 10 minutes? So again, there's a couple of things that happen then. One, there's a whole change in pace in my voice because I'm now trying to move them into something else. But two, it's created movement. So if they were bored, if they've checked out, if they've got distracted by their phones, because that's what happens, then I'm bringing them back to this. There's a whole lot of buzz in the room, massive buzz, and then I'll bring them all back. So what did you hear? Now, depending on how big the room is, I might actually get people to specifically say, so I'll go, yes, Paulina, what did you hear? I'm not asking what did you say, what did you hear? So Paulina's telling me what she just heard from somebody, not the other way around. And if it's too big a room, I'll just say, just yell it out. Just yell it out. So then everyone's yelling. And you'll get a few words. And it's okay, so I'm hearing this, I'm hearing this. Right, now let's move on. Yeah, so it's just, and again, having those kind of things, that's a little bit like having your stories in your brag bag. Having your stories and having some of your things up your sleeve. What do I do if they get bored? Oh, I'm just going to do a pair chair. I'm going to do, do a physiological exercise. Everyone, I say that's one thing. Everyone, and they look at me and I say everyone. All right, and then we'll do a boogie or a cross brain something. So yeah, there's always something. You're welcome.
It's probably a water break too. So you guys talk. I'm just going to get a sip of water.
Can do that, absolutely, absolutely. I think what else I do? Oh, and so, depending on how I set the room up first too, because of course you can, depending on the nature of the presentation, you can also set the boundaries of what's acceptable behaviour. So, when I'm doing housekeeping at the front end of a workshop, I'll say, so, bathrooms are there, we'll be having breaks at these times. And if you've got your phone on you, because, hey, let's face it, we've all got our phone on us, please make sure that it's on silent or on vibrate, if that's your kind of thing. Everyone travels. If you've got it on vibrate, make sure you've got it, depending on the audience. Of course, we all know that life happens, so if you need to do something, then by all means do it. But I do ask you to keep your attention on the speakers today. So if I've set that kind of thing up at the front, then if people are starting to do things that were not acceptable behaviour, I can then do so just before I move on to the next point, if the person next to you is distracted, just give them a nudge. It used to happen all the time in networks when people would get lost in their phones or at the back of the room because they've already had a couple of drinks, they'd start talking. And that was interesting because you've got a panel of novices who were already nervous. And so I'd go, hey, guys at the back, if you could just kill your conversations for now or take it outside because these people on stage have given up their time and I'm having trouble hearing or I'm having trouble concentrating. So you make it in a way that doesn't, you don't do the school mum thing, but you just kind of go, oh, yeah. What's the one?
With what you presented, that kind of process, would you directly translate that to if you were preparing for something online?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it is, and I feel like I must have dropped a couple of slides because there was, when you are presenting, and it doesn't matter what your audience, or sorry, where your audience is, you've still got to build rapport, you've still got to generate your interaction, and in fact, in an online environment, it's even tougher. Because at least here, I can eyeball you and I can play. But in an online environment, if you are still watching, it's a lot harder to get people in. So I did an entire webinar the other day where I was having to get them to type in tell me what you think, blah, 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 blah. Now that was a big one. There was 300 people in the room, in the virtual room. So the comments were going so fast that was actually harder to manage than if people were yelling out. So it was interesting. But yeah, you still do your own right, you still do your reduce to amplify, you still have structures for impact. You'll get really clear on your 3 key messages. You still keep them at mind.
Anything extra you'd recommend or say to that? I mean, I myself, I'm not afraid of public speaking if I'm doing it, but if something is online, I know, I find myself not going through my normal processes or just trying to think, okay, what else do I need to do?
So stick to your normal processes is the first thing. A couple of other things that happen when you're doing online, most of the time you're sitting.
Yeah.
And when you speak, you're standing. So it's actually having to be conscious of both your voice and your body and being upbeat, doing your best with your lighting too, because if you're dark and you're seeing then that you're dark, then you actually start to diminish in energy as well. Being okay with being a little bit over the top, even though you feel like you're being over the top online, but it counts. And you've sat in those online meetings, right, where somebody's talking like they normally talk in a meeting. I'm like, boring. And it's even worse because it's online. And you're far more likely to check out. My other tip with online is look through the camera. So what we're actually doing 9 times out of 10 when we're on an online meeting is we're looking at ourselves. We are. We're looking at ourselves because we want to make sure that we look fabulous. But when we're looking at ourselves, that's it. The camera's up here, or on my son's computer, the camera's down there. Awful. Yeah, note to self. Never buy a computer with the camera down below. But If you're looking at yourself, then you're actually not making eye contact. So it actually looks like, for those in the room, it looks like this. It looks like I'm talking down here. And for those online, it actually looks like I'm talking to the table. And whilst that's a really subtle shift in the current environment, it makes a massive difference. If you're staring through your camera, and I do mean through, and imagining your people on the other side of that camera, then you're connecting with them better. That's an old play, the Play School trick. If Play School, the kids' TV show on the ABC, you've all watched it. The presenters there talk about that one of their things was to never ever perform to the camera. They were performing to the kids on the other side of the camera that they were imagining. So look through the camera. Welcome. Lynn's got one and it's all here.
Thank you. I've written.
I love it. I've written so many notes. That's a really good question. So my first piece of feedback is always the audience's response. Have the audience, well, did I lose the audience or are they still with me right at the very end? I'm very conscious at the moment that the online audience have probably checked out. I don't know whether that's true, and if you haven't, yeah, I'm so glad you're here. But I'm very conscious of the hybrid model is actually really challenging. So if my audience is still here, that's first piece of feedback. I actually generally don't ask for feedback in terms of a survey form or a feedback form or anything like that. There's a couple of reasons, and they're going to sound really arrogant, but they're not, so bear with me. If I hand out a feedback form with all of the stock standard questions, the feedback I'm going to receive is going to come from a place of not knowing. And so, you know, one example, well, you shouldn't wear red because it washes you out. Like, thanks. Yeah. So I'm not a fan of feedback forms because you're inviting a conversation. You're basically inviting opinions. And you know, I do have a saying: what other people think of me is none of my business. It's too easy to get sucked into that kind of stuff. But if people haven't taken the action that I want them to take, if that I know I've bombed. Tonight, I'll be honest, I feel like I've bombed in the presentation part because there was, it will teach me for doing too much in 1 week. But I was quite confident that I actually had about 50 minutes, so I was going to try to cram into 40. So my feedback immediately there is something went wrong. But my fix instantly is I'll offer up something else. So, you know, again, that's that service mentality. I'll still deliver. My final thing on getting feedback, no, I don't record myself deliberately to hear how I think, or to hear how I think. That would be dangerous. to hear how I sound. However, enough video and recording has been done of me that I know. So I guess my final piece is I've learned now to be conscious of dropping my voice, not a full octave, but because when I get excited, I can talk up here, and you know, that's all lovely. And so it's scratching your throat, and it's also really annoying for you to listen to. So, you know, dropping my voice, particularly when I'm doing video or online work. Would I recommend that you record yourselves? No, because none of us like how we sound in recording, and it's not real anyway. So I wouldn't do it. I think it just adds. Just gauge, did you get the response that you want? And how easy was it for you to get that response? Did you have to work really hard, or did it just kind of flow? That would be feedback. You're welcome. I think that's another one.
Yeah. One more question. Just timing. I'm so sorry. One more question.
Do you have any schooling for someone
you mean as in a meeting or?
Or when you're taking questions.
Oh,
I
yeah.
get very easily, like, you know. So do you think, oh, the long list of things I could have said?
That's a really great question. What do other people think? You literally get other people to provide feedback. That's a fabulous question. What do others think? Oh, yeah. And so you can literally, and then other people are talking. You've literally got a few moments of kind of going, okay, and then that'll trigger you. Go, oh, yeah. Or sometimes I'll put it straight back to the person. That's a really good question. What do you think of that before I give you my answer? Yeah. So again, just, it's funny, and now that I reflect on that, it's always being in command of your message, even if your message in that moment is silence, even if that message is buying yourself some thinking time. So yeah, what do you think of that? That's really interesting. So, and sometimes I go, oh, that's interesting. Let me think about that for a moment. Like, and that's fine too. I hadn't thought about that. So it's perfectly okay to, and actually that's a big one in meetings. We often feel like we need to have the instant answer. Whereas if you just pause and go, actually I'm not sure. I might have to get back to you on that. Well, what do you think? So yeah, they might store and take things. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you really want to avoid that. And don't get me wrong, getting rid of verbal diarrhea is not about being stilted and boring. It's about being clear on where you're taking your audience and therefore not getting lost in that whole thinking out loud process, which is what we often do when we're rattled. We'll think out loud. And then as we're thinking out loud and we're trying to take people on the journey and they're losing and we're losing, and it's you just want to get clear first. Where are we going? And then just be a conversation. Be yourself. Be yourself. You're going to wrap this up now.
I'm going to hand over to Paul to wrap up. Big round of applause.
Respect, but still amazing. Thank you so much for coming. I think that was absolutely incredible. Public speaking, I feel like, yeah, that's 3% of the people in the world that find it very comfortable are very special, so they should be considering themselves very lucky because for the rest of us it's torture. It's just more practice. Maybe, let's have a look at that. Yes. So again, thank you very much for volunteering your time. We really appreciate that. I also want to. There you go. So we wanted to give a huge shout out and a big thank you for Alpha Digital. So they've provided the space, the gear, and they've been incredible, basically helping us facilitate this whole workshop series. So yeah, for Alpha. Of course, we would like to leave you hanging. There is another workshop coming up on the 4th of November, so keep your eye out on our socials. We're going to announce the topic and the speaker very, very soon. If you enjoyed tonight and had fun with us, don't forget that we're here for you. We've got events coming up. We share interesting stories of our mentors and mentees all the time. This program is actually coming to a close soon at the end of November, which I have no idea how the time has gone this fast. It's been a crazy year for so many reasons. But yeah, follow our socials, we're obviously on the line. And keep an eye out for the next intake next year. Share with your friends, share with anyone who you think would find it beneficial to join Assisterhood. So thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for everyone who's still online with us, and have a lovely night.